Andrew Casto received his BA from Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana, and his MA and MFA degrees from the University of Iowa. Casto is currently an assistant professor of ceramics at Kansas State University. He was a 2011 and 2012 long-term artist in residence at the at the Foundation for Ceramic Art in Helena, Montana. He has exhibited work internationally in Spain, Croatia, Austria, Slovenia, Belgium, China, and Japan. Casto was awarded the second place award in the 2013 Biennale International de Ceramic in Spain and the 2010 Fuli Prize by the International Ceramic Magazine Editors Association in Fuping, China. Please welcome Andrew Casto.
Okay, happy Saturday morning, everyone. And there's a lot of you out there. My work is a metaphorical and autobiographical search for beauty and purpose within the natural conditions of disorder and happenstance that fill our lives. I believe how we navigate such things determines who we are, and I want my work to speak clearly that it's okay to rest in the unpredictability and the messiness of life. So somehow that unpredictability has led me to this incredible honor, and I want to extend my gratitude to the selection committee and to Jane and to NCECA for choosing to recognize me as an emerging artist. Thanks is also due to my recommenders, Peter Held and Brad Schwiger, two people I respect tremendously and whose encouragement and belief in my work has come at just the right time, like more than once. Now's when I learned to use the clicker. There we go. I grew up in Delaware, Ohio, and I was incredibly fortunate to have parents that encouraged and supported me to follow my passions. They were patient enough to let those passions emerge on their own and not to pressure me into a more traditional career path than this one. They're here today at their first NCECA, so and I can't thank them enough for their love and support. Strangely, like David, 37 years of that. So they convinced me to go to Earlham College, where I was fortunate to meet my first ceramics teacher, Mike Thiedemann, who believed in me really when he had very little reason to do so, and also encouraged me to make a life out of this. I spent a year working at Ohio State as a post-bac after that in the ceramics department, where amongst other fortunate events, I met my wife Heidi, who I also need to thank here, not only for putting up with me, but also for being my studio mate, best friend, and a steadfast supporter of my career for nearly 13 years. She has made incredible sacrifices on my I said I wasn't going to do that. Yeah, so, and I wouldn't be here without her help. So I ultimately landed at the University of Iowa for graduate school, where I was intentional about building relationships with a variety of faculty members, particularly the painting and art history departments, nearly as much as in clay. It was sort of an ad hoc interdepartmental approach, and it immersed me in myriad ways of thinking about art and helped free me from what I think of as sort of ceramics blinders. Following Iowa, I was invited to spend a year at the Archie Bray Foundation as a long-term artist in residence and as the 2011-2012 MJD Fellow. The Bray was a pivotal time in my artistic development, and I was surrounded by supremely talented peers who were really fine human beings, and where I was also able to hone my work into what it is today. The year I spent in Montana was as idyllic as any that I've ever experienced, and I'm really eternally grateful to Steve Lee and Rachel Hicks and Chuck Eidlet and everybody at the Bray for the experience that I had there, and for the service that they continue to provide to this community. If you haven't been there, I really encourage you to get there as soon as you can. So after 2 years teaching at a small liberal arts college in Iowa, I was hired as an assistant professor at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. And we currently house a multifaceted ceramics program that includes several graduate students pursuing MFA degrees, a thriving post-bac program, as well as many talented undergrads, and even a one-year post-MFA artist in residence program. It's a wonderful place to teach and make art, and I feel very fortunate to be there. And I'm grateful to my colleagues, Amy Santaferrero and Glenn Brown, for giving me a job and for being genuinely wonderful people to work with, even when I'm out of my mind with stress for NCECA. So I'd like to start speaking about my work with this quote from one of my favorite thinkers, musician and producer Brian Eno. Rationality is what we do to organize the world, to make it possible to predict. Art is a rehearsal for the inapplicability and the failure of that process. So it's a little tough to grapple with, but to me it suggests that we desire to make things a certain way in our lives. And this process rarely goes as planned. Art can be practiced, in a sense, for the ramifications of such moments. So within this spirit, everything that I do seeks to find beauty and purpose within natural conditions of disorder. On a personal narrative level, this work seeks to reinterpret negative forces of stress and emotional weight as tools for refinement and purification. When translated visually, the work attempts to reflect these interpersonal forces on a macrocosmic level through the language of geologic erosion. I borrowed design elements and strategies from rock, ice, coral, and other natural formations, and I hope to draw formal parallels within this methodology. The work is resolved in the application of gold luster, which creates a tangible link to the iconography of gold as a standard for purity throughout history, and suggests that these moments of near collapse can signify the great worth and opportunity that they possess. I use a process where thick casting slip encases hand-built slip cast and non-clay elements that burn away during the firing process. It's a little bit like working with Greek yogurt. Examples where similar processes happen in nature are of particular interest to me. So this coral nursery, for example, where a reef is being created in and around repurposed concrete off the coast of Key Largo. Here's a piece of mine that feels similar to me, where gas pump handles cast from a mold of a found object and appropriated as design elements in my work are still visible in the structure of the assemblage. I began working this way when I was exposed to a disastrous regional flood in between my first and second year of graduate school. This experience altered the physical location of my graduate studies and required the relocation of our entire arts campus at the University of Iowa. And in the process, it dramatically changed how I thought about my creative practice. Prior to the flood, my work generally involved organizing separate elements, so clay, paint, glaze, etc., into specific recognizable wholes. And I'm borrowing pretty heavily from Eno here, but I'd like to suggest this as a top-down or hierarchical design process. So like an architect or an engineer who designs a building or an object and is the author of that space. And I'll contrast that idea with my current organic design process in the following slides, which I think of as being more of a bottom-up design strategy. When my studio and much of my work was destroyed, I was immediately confronted with the futility of human effort in the face of Mother Nature. So really in a way that I'd never seen before. And it had a profound effect on me and on the work that I made. It was clear to me that the ultimate player in the hierarchy that I was a part of was the river, and there was nothing to be done about that, even by the Army Corps of Engineers. I found great comfort in and value in the post-flood work that we did in the studio, as well as in the community at large. And it became clear to me then that what interested me most about human nature in myself and in others is not our ability to design and create great systems of order, but rather our capacity for recovery and to create positivity and strength in situations of great need. I believe it's what we do after things fall apart that makes us who we are. So this revelation led me to a drastic rethinking of object construction. And presently, I embrace a practice that prefers the reduction of recognizable form into nuclei of sorts, and then integrates these nuclei into disparate and dynamic assemblages without preconceived notions of the results of the process, as much as I can help it. And often, initially recognizable forms are recontextualized as design elements in the work. So this is instead a bottom-up or organic process, unlike architecture, and perhaps more like farming, where a cultivator collaborates with an existing system of soil, weather conditions, and time. And in this model, the question of originality and authorship is somewhat skewed, and the inclusion of existing objects, clay and otherwise, is encouraged. Assemblages are produced then through the accumulation of material coated in a porcelain shell. When done properly, the work creates itself to a degree. And it's a wonderful way to interact with material in the studio, and it allows me to be as surprised as anyone with how the work comes out. As a result, it's my hope that my work is somewhat of a collaborative effort between myself and forces of nature, like gravity and entropy and the clay in my pieces. This practice is also heavily influenced by the visual artist and thinker Robert Irwin, who designed the Central Garden at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, spending several years traveling the California coast, gathering specimens for transport to the grounds of the museum, and all the while sort of maintaining this future vision of what the space could look like. So it's a similar collaboration with ceramic materials that I'm interested in, where the clay is allowed to be what it already is, and I'm simply a facilitator, encouraging and courting results. I also actively research other creative processes where generative practice and assemblage are the norm. So as a child of the late 80s and early 90s, the early years of hip-hop music and DJ culture, pre-sort of sampling laws and copyright lawsuits, are of great interest to me. When I was at the Brea, I began experiments in what I consider a visual form of sampling, or appropriation in the DJ sense. So I started using discarded remnants from others working around me in the studio. And these are rejected, unfired elements of work by Ben Krupke and Kenyon Hansen, two of my friends and studio mates during my Brea residency. Here's a shot where you can see one of Ben's wheels in a prominent location in a piece of mine, and some of Kenyon's handles in another piece, which furthers the idea that the work emerges from a cultivation of available elements, and in this case, from the slop buckets of the studios of people working around me even. So I've used this method of object sampling in other projects as well, particularly when I lived and taught in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in 2013. The same flood I mentioned earlier also crippled this town 20 miles to the north, and it didn't take long to see when I moved there that entire neighborhoods were just missing. And there might be a few boarded up houses remaining amongst empty lots and sort of ghost-like driveways leading to vacant green fields. I began to walk in these neighborhoods as I tried to get to know the town, and discovered that remnants of lives relocated still live just below the surface of the grass in much of these areas. And it doesn't take long on a walk like this before you literally trip over a half-buried horseshoe or bump into a child's tree swing ominously swinging over just a green lot. I would gather these items and cast them in rubber and plaster and make positives to include in my work. Once molds were made, objects were returned to their original locations so that they were in effect just borrowed for a short time and then put back to rest in their previous habitats. So my unpacking of the Brian Eno quote earlier was that we often desire to make things a certain way in our lives, and this process really rarely goes as planned, I think, and that art can be practiced, in a sense, for the ramifications of such moments. As I stand up here, it might seem like my plans have worked out pretty well, and to a degree they have. I feel really, really fortunate to be here. But there have been many complications and heartbreaking failures and unhappy surprises along the way. And I'm no better at anyone else than seeing the good and bad situations in the moment. But I do believe that personal and artistic growth happen as we fumble through the struggles of life. It's my hope that this work speaks to the grit and the grime of our trials and tribulations, and that with clay's amazing ability to crack, drip, cling, and yet somehow still survive, there's a nod to positivity and to perseverance, and to the beauty found in wading through the muck of life. I talk in my artist statement about how stress and emotional weight in our lives might instead serve as opportunities for refinement, rather than functioning as tools of our undoing. It's a way of saying that what's often most real in our life are our hardships, and that these things put us in touch with presence and who we are in a way that not much else does. I want the work to be a formal depiction of this. It's about gravity, and it's about collapse, and about being okay with both. It's what happens when I give up trying to make perfect, pretty things and allow the realness of who I am to take center stage. And it's a rehearsal, really, for who I want to be in real life. Thank you.